avidly the next. He was, frankly, downright unsettling. He didn't do anything at all. He sat there expressionless, head straight, no matter what happened. A woman with a wailing child entered the car and sat right behind him, and still nothing. He didn't so much as turn his head or frown in annoyance. And that kid was fucking loud, too. By the time the subway reached my stop, I found myself queasy. And when I exited the car, my hands were shaking like I was having a nicotine fit. Something about that man was wrong. He was, I thought, some kind of freak. A sociopath, maybe. One of those quiet guys who it turns out has a dozen women's heads in his freezer. The first victim, his mother. I found myself intentionally dawdling after work in the afternoons, stopping to browse in kiosks in the mall near the subway even when I didn't intend on buying anything. For a couple weeks I avoided catching that subway. When I found myself at the stop when it was pulling in, I made sure to choose a train car as far from the one I'd see him in as possible. Then, one morning, I saw another person who set off the same warning bells in my head. A woman, just as plain looking, just as out of place and hustle and commotion around her. The moment I recognized her, I realized later, was when my obsession began. My people watching, which had began as a bit of a hobby to stave off boredom, became something of a religion to me. I couldn't enter a subway or ride a bus without finding myself examining everyone, filling out a mental checklist in my head. Plain clothes of solid colors, no brands, check. No expressions, no casual glances out the window or towards other passengers, check. No bags, purses, or accessories, check, 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 check. We've got another. I started calling them strangers. I didn't see them every day, even after I started taking the metro more than I needed to, even when I found myself riding buses out of my way in the evenings. But they were there often enough. Seeing one would set my teeth on edge, make my palms sweaty and my throat feel dry. If you've ever given a speech, you might recognize the feeling. Even though they didn't pay me the slightest bit of attention, I felt like I was on display for them. I could see them plain as day. How could they miss me? They didn't, though, not in any way that I could tell. And when eventually my curiosity overpowered my fear, I decided to follow one. I chose the one that I'd found first, the man in the afternoon subway who always kept the same seat. I got on and took a seat behind him. We rode to the end of the line, and he rose and walked out before I did. Keeping distance between us, I tailed him, but he didn't go far. He took a seat on a nearby bench, as expressionless as always, and I turned a corner and waited, trying to look nonchalant. After a few minutes, the next metro arrived, and I watched him enter it, and saw him take the same seat. I couldn't find the nerve to follow him again. He hadn't gone anywhere. He just rode the metro to the end of the line, and then what? Rode it back. What possible reason would anyone have for that? It nagged at me. Long after I'd rode a later train back home and tried to get some rest. I couldn't leave it alone. Not until I could make sense of it. I found myself more than confused. I was downright angry now. Why was this uncanny bastard, this almost inhuman person, riding subway trains back and forth, going nowhere? The mind, once read, recoils from certain things, because the very sight of them is an affront. Spiders set it off in a lot of people, particularly great big ones. They just looked wrong to us. Alien. That was the effect the strangers were beginning to have on me. They offended my senses. I followed him again the next day, and the day after that. Every day, for at least a week, The two of us made our silent trips together, though only I knew it. By the end of the week, I was following him for hours, until the last train had stopped near my apartment block that night. We rode them from one end of the city to the other, then back again. I wasn't people watching any longer. I was person watching. I was stranger watching. I didn't have eyes for anyone else, though peripherally I noticed more than a few confused glances sent my way. Other than that, we two might have been the only two people on the planet for all I cared. I lost my job the next week. My manager was kind and timid, but firm. I wasn't concentrating. I had no focus. Wasn't being anywhere near productive. It was actually quite a speech, I think, but I could barely hear it. All I could think about was my new work, my vigil. What would that man, no, that thing on the subway get up to when I wasn't there to keep an eye on him? I left work for the last time at noon that day. Normally I'd have to start tailing my subject at 5:30, but I was sure that he'd be waiting for me. I wish now that I'd paid more attention to that day. Was it sunny? It was summer after all. I could have walked around downtown. We checked out a few pretty girls. Could have had an iced cappuccino and a smoke at an outdoor cafe and then gone home. Put my growing obsession out of my head. Found a new job. Taken to reading on trains and buses again. Instead, I waited. More than one train goes up and down the line, so I sat in the station for at least an hour until I saw him through a window. I walked in the subway car and noticed that for the first time, my skin wasn't clammy. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't pounding hard. I sat for the first time right across from him, directly in his line of sight. Watched for a change in his face. Would he recognize me? If he did, I saw no sign of it. And I was looking hard. We must have made quite a pair, sitting across from one another that afternoon, staring at and into one another. It was hard not to let the building rage in me contort my face. With effort, I was able to keep as still and as expressionless as him. Inside, I practically screamed at myself. React, you fucking asshole. See me, damn it. I know you for what you are. I didn't, though. And my silent demands weren't answered. Not for the first trip around, or the second, or the third, or the 10th. We rode far into the night together, and at each terminus we got out together and waited. I sat right beside him on the bench, watching him from the corner of my eye, and still got nothing from him. But two could play that game as well as one. Finally we made our last trip together. I had it brilliant. Last trip of the night before the train stopped running. I'd always let him get away from me at that point, because the end line is a long way from my home, and the buses stop running at the same time as the subways. But this time, I'd follow him. Let me see what he was when the train stopped running. I'd get some answers. Maybe. The subway rolled on, and anticipation grew in me. The car emptied out around us slowly, until it was just we two silent watchers below the city. I fought to keep a manic grin at bay. The subway train slowed to a crawl, and then stopped. End of the line. The stranger didn't move, still didn't react at all. The car stood still, doors open. I could dimly hear the last few stragglers making their way into the station somewhere behind us. Footsteps echoing in the silence. Nothing. The speaker system didn't let anyone half asleep know that we'd reached the terminus. Still nothing. And finally, I could hear footsteps again. The conductor or something. popping his head into each car to make sure it was empty before taking the train wherever the hell it goes for the night. I didn't take my eyes from my silent quarry. I managed to see the conductor from the corner of my eye when he finally reached our car. He looked in. His eyes roamed over us, and a puzzled look came over his face. He blinked a few times and paused. I waited for him to speak. The moment stretched out, but then, with a slight shake of his head, he left us. There was a car ahead of ours, and I heard him stop to check that too. And then a few minutes later, the train started up again. We rode for a time, then looped around and the subway was parked. I could see into the windows of more trains on either side of us, and through their opposing windows into even more. And then he smiled at me. It was just a small curl of the lip. It would have gone unnoticed if I hadn't spent the last several hours studying his face.
So,
He said in a rough baritone.
here we are.
I tried to respond but couldn't right away. My throat had clamped shut. Terror filled me. I felt like the whole underground cavern we were in had just collapsed onto me. I coughed and stammered and finally managed with a raspy voice to ask a question that had kept me up at night. It drove me halfway to madness and led me to this place in this moment. What are you? He ignored me. He stood and the train doors open. Then, shockingly, he turned to face me. He didn't wait for an answer, but walked out onto the platform. I scrambled to follow. Come on, damn it! I shouted. Talk to me! Who are you? What? Why do you ride the metro all fucking day? He didn't look back, or slow his step. I couldn't see his face, but it's safe to guess that he didn't react at all. No more than he had to anything else. I stalked after him, still shouting for a time, but eventually gave up. 5 words was all I was going to get out of him, I guessed. I walked along the platform until we came to a junction, then turned. Now we were perpendicular to the trains around us. The path ahead was lit from above, and I couldn't see where it ended. The trains on either side of us went on forever, as far as I could tell. Far too many trains to service one day, I realized. It wouldn't have mattered by then, I figured, but I probably should have paid more attention to that at the time. I'm not sure how long we walked. I had a watch once, but it broke. I took out my cell phone at one point, but got no reception down there. And all it would show me was no signal. The stranger would stop every now and then and look at a subway car for a minute or two, but then pass on. It took me a while to figure out why, but eventually I saw that they weren't all the same. Long lines of them would be similar, and then we'd come to a different model. It'd be a little larger or smaller, have slightly different shape. The cockpits, or whatever you call the front part where the conductor sits, were superficially different as well. I didn't and don't know exactly what he was looking for, but eventually he must have found it, because we turned again, and the subway doors opened when my impromptu guide stopped in front of them. We entered, took our seats. Hey, Steve.
Hey, John, how's the weather up there?
Cold and snowy. What's up?
Well, I got that audio you sent over for the Hello Fresh spot. It sounds a little weird.
Weird how?
Here, just listen.
Boy, do I love HelloFresh. How about the fact that all ingredients come pre-measured and handy and labeled meal kits, so you know which ingredients come with which recipes.
Is that how I sound?
Seriously? Do you really not know what your voice sounds like?
What? No, I I don't just record audio without listening to it and send it to you expecting miracles from my horrible performances. So, yeah. Sounds good. Keep going.
Oh, really? Are you sure you don't hear anything wrong with the audio?
Nope.
HelloFresh means no more time-consuming meal planning or grocery shopping. You get to try things you never think to cook on your own and enjoy eating outside your comfort zone. From a wide variety of chef-curated recipes that change weekly, and lots of one-pot recipes for seriously speedy cooking with minimal cleanup. And when you're done, your soul is mine.
So, what did you think?
What do I think about what?
Your recording. Whatever that voice is. You really don't hear anything wrong with that drop?
No, I mean, what? Oh, wait. Oh my! I can't believe I didn't realize it.
Finally.
I forgot to say that you can save $30 off your first week by using promo code creepy30 at hellofresh.com.
You're so weird. This is what happens when you don't do scary movie spoofs.
You think that's weird? I'm not actually even in Minnesota right now.
What? Where are you?
Right behind you.
Ah!
Save $30 off your first week by using promo code creepy30 at hellofresh.com. No producers were injured during the recording of this ad. Are you willing to speak to me now? I asked him. No answer. I sighed with frustration and seriously weighed the pros and cons of punching him right in the face for a time. When suddenly the lights of the car came on and I heard the engine starting up. What the fuck? He gave me a look that was almost sad.
You're not going to be able to go back.
What are you talking about? Go back where? Nothing again. A stonewalling asshole. The train lurched into motion, pushing off in the opposite direction than the one we came from, I think. The endless parade of them had thrown off my sense of direction. It rolled for a few minutes, then began to slow as we approached the stop. His vacant gaze grew sharper, and for the first time I got the sense that he was actually staring at me, rather than just looking in the direction I happened to be in.
Be still. Be silent. Don't catch their attention.
The train stopped, the doors opened, and they began to flood in. I don't know what I noticed first. The weird clothes, the two long arms with hands that almost brushed the floor, the jet black eyes and angular faces, or the blue-gray hue of their skin. My eyes took in all those stimuli, but for a long second my brain refused to process it. And when I finally did, I was barely able to bite down on the shriek that tried to tear its way from my throat. I thought my heart was going to explode. Hell, I thought I was going to explode. I was like a strummed guitar string. Everything in me lurched and throbbed. My sight grew dizzy, which I was thankful for. And I vomited. My mouth was clenched shut and I forced myself to swallow it, barely managing it. My instincts were screaming his words at me. Be still. Be silent. Don't catch their attention. That day is a blur. We rode the subway car up and down the line, still and expressionless for hours, for days perhaps. It seemed much longer than the line I knew, the line I'd followed the stranger along. The hideous things around us seemed to pay us no undue attention. though he must have stood out fiercely. I was so petrified with fear that when we finally returned to the endless cavern of trains alone, I burst into tears. I collapsed on the floor and just sobbed for a long time. The stranger watching impassively. When I gained control of myself, I looked at him imploringly. "Take me home," I croaked out. "Please."
I can't.
He told me.
Don't know which one of these would lead you back. If any of them do.
He stood and walked out onto the platform, and I rose wearily and followed him. He spun around sharply.
I think you followed me enough.
The rage I'd felt for him before, that the panic had temporarily buried, rose up in me. "What?" I screamed, rushing forward. I grabbed him by the shoulder.
This week on the Myths and Legends podcast, I'll introduce the show and discuss what it'll be about. Then, we'll start right in on the story of a knight from King Arthur's Round Table, whose poor decision-making is rewarded with a castle, magic rings, and a pet lion. Then, at the end of the show, in the Mythological Creature of the Week segment, I'll talk about tiny, invisible Icelandic elves who like to party. This is the Myths and Legends podcast, episode 1A, Yvain Glory. Welcome to the inaugural episode of the podcast. As you no doubt gather from the name of the show, we'll be talking about myths, legends, and folklore in general from all around the world. There are many, many reasons to know these stories, and I'll just mention a few here. They're really helpful to know other cultures and peoples, and can be as informative as a historical record in knowing cultures as a whole. They've inspired current popular stories. For example, the next larger story I'll go over is the Saga of the Volsungs. It's a little-known Norse saga that was part of J.R.R. Tolkien's inspiration when writing Lord of the Rings. Lastly, they're just really interesting, bizarre, ridiculous, and touching stories, and I'm excited to tell them. I'll try to tell them as close to the original story as I can, trying to avoid the intervening years with cultures and adaptations that have put their spins on things. For example, the story of Aladdin, a Middle Eastern folktale about a boy and a genie, is way different than the popular Disney movie. In the original tale, Aladdin was actually Chinese, and the story was set in China, and his genie, which didn't grant wishes, originally came from his ring. Okay, here's another one that Disney's changed, the story of Mulan, the Chinese girl who took her aging father's place in the army. Contrary to the movie, Mulan fought for 10 years without being discovered, and retired to many accolades. Okay, one more. In the original story, the Holy Grail was accompanied by an equally holy lance that bled from its tip, which was quietly minimized on later tellings. That was probably a good idea, because the title, The Quest for the Holy Lance That Bleeds from Its Tip, is way less snappy than The Quest for the Holy Grail. I'll talk about all sorts of legends, myths, creatures, heroes, and fairy tales in this podcast. Just to name a few, we'll talk about all the stories from King Arthur's court, the legendary Norse sagas, the Philosopher's Stone, Beowulf, Atlantis, Robin Hood, Coolin, he's an Irish mythological hero, Vlad the Impaler, and so many more. These are really great stories, and once again, I'm excited to tell them. I was an English major in college, and I was struck by how these incredibly interesting folklore stories were buried deep in these dry, aged, inaccessible texts. I'm endeavoring to pull them out of the past and breathe new life into them. Today we'll start with Yvain, a knight from King Arthur's court. We'll definitely cover all the King Arthur stories in time. There's so many great tales of him and his legendary knights that it would easily last us the first 50 episodes. And since this is the Myths and Legends podcast, and not the King Arthur podcast, we're going to cover Arthur piecemeal. We'll definitely get to all the stories, but there'll be one here and one there, and not all at once. And they'll culminate in the quest for the Holy Grail at the end of it. The story of Yvain is a nice little standalone story where we can get our feet wet with the King Arthur tales. He's somewhat of a lesser knight, but his story was insanely popular in the Middle Ages. All you really need to know for this story is that it takes place somewhere between 500 or 600 AD in Great Britain. Arthur is the king of the Britons, and
Imagine if hundreds of years from now, we colonized Mars and the asteroid belt, but took all of Earth's worst problems with us, like corruption, deception, and injustice. On February the 1st, the sci-fi series that IO9 named the best show of the year returns to explore what happens when we reach the stars, but are still at each other's throats. It's based on the best-selling book series The Expanse. New season returns February the 1st at 10, 9 Central on Sci-Fi. Welcome to Mysterious Universe, Season 17, Episode 3. Coming up on this show, we've got Chinese New Year do's and don'ts, the second installment of our Greenstone saga. And Paul Bartok joins us to discuss his memoirs from his new book, Flashbacks. I'm Benjamin Grundy, joining me is Aaron Wright.
I am so excited for today's interview. Unfortunately, I didn't get to attend, but I have listened back to it today, and the stories are just incredible.
It's an amazing book.
Yeah.
Absolutely phenomenal. And we had a huge interview, Sean and I, a massive discussion. It's one of these stories that reminds me of David Huggins. You remember David Huggins?
It's so similar to that. That's exactly what I was thinking. And the reason for that is that if you recall David Huggins, he described his experiences of ongoing ET contact over a period of, I think it was 30 or 40 years. It was a long time. But the reason why it sticks in my memory so strongly and so viscerally is because the drawings he created, he was an artist, so he created these drawings and these paintings of his experiences. And there was this one that I just can't get out of my mind where he has this interaction with this hybrid type being, and there's a portal in the wall, but standing in the corner watching over his interaction is this tall mantis being. It was just, it makes it shiver.
It's creepy, isn't it?
It is creepy.
It's just the visual image stays with you forever. And in a similar way, as you mentioned, Sean Bartok is also an artist, and you can see how his artwork over the years seems to have been influenced by something.
Yeah.
Now, it's intriguing in his case because he's had early interactions and strange experiences from a very early age, but it seems as though a move to a new property in Denver, Colorado seemed to bring some of these old memories to the surface, and also the property itself stirred up all sorts of odd activity that immediately started plaguing him, his wife, and their 2 children, and their pets as well.
Yeah, this really reinforced some of the theories that we've had over the years of there being certain locations around the world, such as what Keel refers to, John Keel referred to as window areas where there is a heightened level of paranormal activity. There's areas in the UK where military bases are being built, and is it possible that they're built there so that they can exploit the energy of, for the lack of a better word, of that location? But in the cases here, it's just funny that he didn't really recall any ongoing encounters until he came to this location. It was almost like this location, the energy of it or whatever it is, somehow removed that lid and all those memories started coming back. And his experiences are quite disturbing.
Yeah, it's really quite amazing. It's an artist's memoir of alien abductions, native spirits, and enlightenment. Flashbacks from Sean Bartok. That's the feature on this show. That's coming up in a moment. First up, Happy Chinese New Year. So relaxing. Oh, the serenity.
It's pretty cool.
Beautiful time of year.
I looked it up. Well, the reason why I thought we should mention it is because apparently Australia is having the biggest Chinese New Year in the Southern Hemisphere.
Why is it the biggest?
I don't know. It doesn't seem like a big deal when you think, well, what other populations are there in the Southern Hemisphere? And you kind of go, oh, there's nothing else.
I still remember a couple of years ago when I had a crazy week. You and I had this massive week. I was exhausted, didn't get any sleep the night before, and I went out for dinner with my family, and we went to, I can't remember, it was an RSL club in one of the western suburbs, and I just wanted to sit down and have a nice, quiet dinner. And then when we walked into the club, it suddenly hit me, oh crap, it's Chinese New Year. At first I thought, oh no, it's going to be okay, it's going to be fine.
And
as soon as I sat down, the dragon dance, or the lion dancers come in. Bow, 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 bow. Oh.
Yeah. It was happening the other day in Chatswood, and I was in a foul mood, which is totally unlike me. I've never like that. at all. I was in this filthy, filthy mood. And it was bang, 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 bang. I couldn't handle it. Just, yeah, not good at all.
Stop forcing your New Year's Eve culture down our throats.
And you know what, Ben? It's the year of the flaming cock.
Oh, that's all right.
There's no double entendre there at all. I mean, some people would say it's the fire rooster, but it really is the year of the flaming cock.
What cultures have quiet New Year's celebrations?
No one does.
Surely there's some culture out there that has just a little. Maybe the Japanese do it. It's New Year's, and they're like just a little. Yay! So that's my perfect New Year's celebration. Just quiet and relaxed.
Well, you know what? There are a few do's and don'ts as to what you should be doing on Chinese New Year. I mean, yes, it should apply only to Chinese, but it is suggested that everyone should take notice of this. So first of all is that do not get your hair cut on Chinese New Year's Day, because your uncle will die. Well, I'm serious.
Okay, so you're going to explain how this came about.
May not necessarily die, but a lot of bad luck will be bestowed upon him. So this goes back to the Han Dynasty, or the Han people, where it was required that you had to have the front of your head shaved. It was this new law that came in. And apparently there was this legend that people would start saying, do you remember when we didn't have to have our heads shaved? And that in Chinese sounds very similar to dead uncle. So it then, over 400 years, translated into if you get a haircut on New Year's, your uncle will end up in a lot of pain, a lot of bad luck. So just avoid that if you can.
Doesn't everyone travel to meet their family at New Year's? So everyone's going to look terrible because they won't be able to get a haircut.
Well, you know what? There is I think it's 400 million people are moving across China right now, because it's also another superstition that everything you do at the start of Chinese New Year influences the rest of your year. So yes, of course, it's a holiday and you visit your family, but it's also believed that you have to interact with as many people as possible that you want in your life for that year, so that continues. But don't go to hospital on Chinese New Year, because if you do, you're going to have bad luck of bad health all through the year.
Right.
So there's a few things like that. It's also, don't wash your hair on New Year's Day, because then you're going to get rid of all of the good luck that comes from the water god. Get a bag of what was it? Get a bag of dumplings, because it looks like a bag of gold and hanging up somewhere.
I'll tell you what I'm looking forward to. The year of 2017 for Chinese tourists.
Oh no.
Let's take bets on how bad their behavior can get in this new year.
What was it about last year? Was someone stealing toilets or something?
I was looking at the top 10 bad behaviors of Chinese tourists from 2016 from this Shanghai List website, and I think it was number 4 on the list was stop stealing toilet seats from Japanese hotels. Apparently it's this big problem where they're just walking out with Toto toilet seats in their luggage. Why?
It won't even fit other toilets. Do they think that? Why would you do that? Other people have sat all over that toilet seat.
It's a souvenir. As if you wouldn't take a Toto. It's like taking a bathroom.
I would take the whole toilet, not have it installed. I would take the seat.
The other big problem is, as the planes, Chinese airlines are taxiing and getting ready to hit the runway and take off, it's getting stuffy inside the cabins. So people
pressurizing.
Yeah, people are going to the emergency doors and opening them up for fresh air. It's a big problem. It's happened 4 or 5 times in the last year.
So that ship that I was on, the Ovation of the Seas, I was on a trial run, but it's going to be based out of Australia. So it's here at the moment, and it's going up to China. So it does the run between here and China. And there was a big problem that before I went on the ship, someone was telling me that they had a group of Chinese tourists on board to test it out, to see how it would go with the Chinese market. Apparently, a woman was sitting in the main dining hall, the formal dining hall, and her child wanted to go to the bathroom, so she opens
I knew it was going to be a poo story.
She pulls a plastic bag out of her handbag, places it on the table where they sit you with other people, by the way, then proceeds to pick up her child and hold the child on the table as the child pissed into a plastic bag in the middle of the room.
Most of the stories on this list are exactly that. It's usually flights, and the mother or the father has taken their young child and just instructed them to piss or shit somewhere in the cabin, but that's not the toilet. Just some random corner on the carpet in the cabin of the plane. Go ahead, it's fine, it's all normal.
So do you think in 400 years' time there's going to be some superstition about not letting your child shit on an airplane?
Yeah, there'll probably be some Confucius saying.
Year of the Flaming Cock, indeed. If you want to find out more of those superstitions, I'll link to it in the show notes so you can check it out for yourself. There's a whole heap of them. Things like don't buy books and I don't know. It's all
Don't buy books.
Yeah,
That's a
don't buy
great
books.
New Year's resolution.
Buy a Kindle, you'll be fine.
Are you going to do anything for Chinese New Year's?
No, I think we'll do something. I mean, it's supposed to be a big festival, but if there's any of that banging involved, maybe I'll avoid it.
If I've had a good night's sleep, I enjoyed Chinese New Year's.
Yeah, and setting off fireworks,
Yeah.
which are highly illegal here.
If I've had 2 hours sleep, it's very bad. Very, very bad.
See how it goes.
Well, let's go into our interview. This is Flashbacks, an artist's memoir of alien abductions, native spirits, and enlightenment. It's from Sean Bartok. And as we were saying, he didn't realize that all these memories didn't surface for him until he was 43 years old. So much in this book, I don't even know where to start. So let's just go into the interview. This is Sean Bartok with Flashbacks, an artist's memoir of alien abductions, native spirits, and enlightenment. You can find him at seanbartok.com, and the book's available on Amazon now. We'll link to everything in the show notes at mysteriousuniverse.org. We hope you enjoy the interview. Joining us on the show today is Sean Bartok. He's the author of Flashbacks, this brand new book describing his strange experiences throughout his lifetime. Welcome to the show, Sean. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me on your program.
Before we get to hear some of the strange things that have happened to you, give us a sense of what kind of person you are. I mean, we understand that you're an artist. What kind of medium do you work in, and where did you get your training? Just give us a bit of a background story on yourself.
Okay, I'll go way back. I was injured. I had an eye injury when I was 9 years old, and I got shot in the eye with a BB. From that point on, my life was quite different. I was in and out of hospitals, and when it came time for me to go to college, the prevailing thoughts were that I shouldn't study anything that took too much reading. So everybody thought, oh, you should go into art. But my parents wanted me to go to a university, so they enrolled me in the University of Kansas, which it turned out had a very good design department. That's what I was in, because everybody knows that artists starve. And so, you always go into graphic design or some sort of design where you can use your artistic skills. I ended up working right out of school as an art director for the contemporary department, Hallmark Cards, and that had never been done before. Nobody just walked out of school and done that. While at the University of Kansas in graduate school, I had taught design, and I just loved the experience more than working in a corporation. I had longed to go back to the university life, and so the opportunity presented itself, and it was at a university in Denver. And so my wife, Sarah, and I moved to Denver and started our life there.
It seems the chronology of the book takes place primarily between the late 1970s and then to the late 1980s. And speaking of you being an artist, I love that you had this little section on how you discovered spandex for the first time. Like, the material was so amazing in the 1980s. I thought that was great. But it seems as though the catalyst to some of these strange experiences, which we're going to get into, was a move to this new house that seemed to be, I guess, out in the wilderness a little bit. Can you tell us about that property and what made it unique?
I'm always on the lookout for a good value, and so we had owned several pieces of property outside of Denver, and we would sell them. So, we were flipping them as fast as we could, and finally we found this fantastic piece of property, and it was on the edge of where you could commute and still keep a job. And so Sarah had a 50-mile one-way trip to her job.
Wow. Okay.
And she was teaching photography at the time on the west side of Denver. And so and it was 100 miles for her every day. So we were right on the edge of the donut. And so there are very few buildings, and we were on a 10-acre lot. It was really pretty remote. So we wanted to build this very energy-efficient home. We wanted to, at first it was going to be an underground home, but we couldn't get anyone to approve it. The bank wasn't too eager to do that.
Yeah.
And we found out they couldn't even inspect it because none of the inspectors knew what they were looking for. So we ended up creating a passive solar home. It was called a stage 3 passive solar. So that was exciting for me as a designer to design it so that it would be as energy efficient as it could be, and yet fit within the landscape that that we were that we had bought, which was a small box canyon, and the distance from the top of our house to the top of the mesa was maybe 200 feet, maybe more. It was a beautiful area, and so we were on the south side of the mesa, so we captured all the sun that we could.
It's fascinating to hear how, you were kind of in the wilderness in a way, and you were extremely concerned about snakes, about rattlesnakes and different types of poisonous snakes getting into the property. But it turns out that wasn't really what you had to worry about. Take us to this first night when you saw lights approaching the house, and from my memory in the book, this was one of the early nights in the house, and you thought an intruder was approaching. Can you take us back to that night and what you experienced?
That was actually about the third or fourth night, and we'd had things happen from the very beginning.
Okay.
But you couldn't put your finger on it. They were just strange things that would happen. And so on that particular night, I was having this vivid dream. I'm with really tall people, and we were walking up what seemed to be the west end of this box canyon that we were in, because I could see out of the corners of my eyes, I could see sort of similar vegetation and rock formations. So we were working our way up to the top of what I thought was the top of our mesa, but I'm with people that are giants.
How big is giant? What, over 7 feet tall?
Oh yeah, I think so. My nose was at the bottom of one of them's scapula.
Okay.
I was right behind this person. But I felt like I was with people that I knew, and I didn't feel threatened by them. But but there was this other thought in the back of my head. My God, these people are big. I can't move my eyes or my body, and so I'm just sort of frozen. But we're moving up this hill, and it has a lot of switchbacks and the like, and it's pitch black out. We're going up this hill, and I'm really frustrated because I can't see very well, and I don't know where I'm at, and I don't know who I'm with. And so finally, I just pulled myself together, and I turned my head, and it's very difficult to do. And I looked down, or behind me, which is down the slope, which is very steep. And I see a line of people way below me, and they have torches, like old-time torches out of the 17th century. And then it's as though I can see face to face with the leader of the people with these torches. And I can tell we have done something to them, and it has either angered them or we have done something horrible, and they are after us. And so at that moment, I wake up out of bed. I just bolt up out of bed, and I'm sweating, and my heart is just about to jump out of my chest. I try to center myself up because I've never had a dream like that before in my life, where it's a snippet of time and it's just so real and yet frustrating. So I'm resting on my elbows as I try to catch my breath and get straightened out. And I hear the rafters up above us moving, and they're creaking. And so I'm thinking it must really be blowing, because the house wouldn't do that normally. So I looked straight out, and in front of me we had a sliding glass doors that are bayed out about 30 inches. And then they have glass on top, so you can see the majestic rock formations above the house.
Sure.
Because we're facing to the west. And just looking out in that direction, trying to get myself straightened around, and all of a sudden I see this elliptical light, and it's really white as it can be. There seems to be no beam, but I don't really think about that. All I see is this light, and it's elliptical. And I think, well, the person is carrying a flashlight, and then because it's at an angle, it's an ellipse, it's not a circle. And so that really piques my interest because a couple nights before, someone had been prowling around the front of the house while I was reading. And so I make the connection that this guy's back. Then I'm really fully alert. And about that time, another ambient light sweeps across the upstairs fireplace wall, or the west wall. And so then I'm really in high gear. The first night we were there, we had this incident, I did. And so I, to protect myself, I got my little 38 snub-nose 38 out. I had moved it to in between the mattress and the springs. So I grabbed that and I head for the light. And I slide over my wife and tell her that she should get under the bed because there might be a firefight. I got ready to jump out, and I looked back behind me, and my wife was still in bed. So I thought, well, instead of doing what I was going to do, I'm going to throw the door open with my left hand and jump out, samurai style, in a squatting position and say, freeze, yada, 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 or I'll shoot. Well, just as I got ready to jump out, the light swings around and goes around to the front of the house, or near in that direction. So I ran as fast as I could to the south side of the house, and we had some balconies there. So I creep out on the balcony, and I think he's going to be coming around from the west side of the house any moment.
You're trying to cut him off.
Exactly. And nobody comes around the corner of the house. And I can't hear anything. And I'm straining my ears. I don't hear anything. And then all of a sudden, I hear the sound of cars, wheels going over gravel and the crunching sound. So I immediately follow my ears, and I see what appears to be a prowl car or a sheriff's car coming into our subdivision.
Okay.
And so I'm relieved, and I realized how stupid I was, or how I jumped to conclusions, and I was going to shoot whoever came around the corner. That would have been tragic for them and for me.
Right. So in this moment, you've convinced yourself that the light you were seeing was simply the light of a police car.
Exactly. So it was at that time that my wife, Sarah, said, "Do you see the lights?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I do." I'm looking at the prowl car come in, the cop car come in, and she said, "Do you see the lights?" And I said, "I do." And so, it was like, what the hell is going on here?
Back
So,
and forth,
right. See, so this goes back and forth, and finally she says, "Did you see the lights?" And I said, "Yeah, they're kind of come up our driveway." So I took a couple of aspirins and ate a peanut butter jelly sandwich. Because by then, my head,
the adrenaline, right?
Yeah, my head was, and I didn't feel quite right. Well, so anyway, I go in and I go to bed, and Sarah is already asleep. I didn't say anything to her like, "Well, I'm glad the cops come around and check on us, blah, blah, blah," because we're out there in the middle of nowhere. So the next morning I wake up, she's already gone. She has to get up at 5 to get dressed and then drive 50 miles to work. So by 6:30, she's in class. And that was about the time I got up. So I went downstairs, and I was going to feed our dogs. We have 2 Labradors, and we bought them to protect the children from snakes, and us too. But at any rate, I was going to feed them, but I couldn't call them. I just didn't have a voice at all. So I called the university, and I said, I'm not going to be in. I can't talk.
So you didn't feel this. You didn't feel this coming on. You didn't feel a sore throat building up. You just woke up after that night with no voice at all.
Exactly. So I kind of have ants in my pants. I've always got to be doing something. So I thought, well, I'll build the shelving for down in the mechanical room for storage. I go to town and I get 2x4s and plywood and all. And so I come back, and as I'm unloading, I just am riveted with this feeling that I'm being watched, and with great intensity. And so I immediately just look up, and I look up to the top of the bluffs to the west of me, which must be like 1,500 feet, visual feet away, and then up. And here's this figure up there. And I'm really possessive now of the property. We never had much before. And so it was like a trespasser. I think I'm going to stare him down. So I lock eyes, at least I think I do, with this guy. And we're intently looking at each other, but I'm not seeing.
Yeah, the way you describe this in the book is really fascinating, because I think we have to make it clear that the figure that you're seeing is too far away for you to make out any details. Am I understanding that correctly?
Exactly, and he was backlit. So finally I give up. It's just like he is just more powerful than I am. And, I'm still locked in, and I can feel him. I just break off and tell myself I've got better things to do. But I think about going up and seeing who it is. But it's a 25-minute hike, a good 25-minute hike to get to the top. So I go down and I work. But as I get downstairs, I think that's the strangest looking person I've ever seen in my life. I've illustrated and taught drawing and I know anatomy, blah, blah, blah. I knew something was weird with this guy. And so I rush back upstairs and I look and he's gone, or it's gone. It was at that time that I remembered that when he had his arms folded in the beginning when we were staring at each other. And then as I broke off, he dropped his arms and they seemed incredibly long. And his head was big, way oversized.
It's so strange that these physical characteristics didn't occur to you until you had left its presence.
Yeah.
I find that really interesting, almost as if there was some kind of mental influence over you to stop you from seeing what was really there.
Oh, I think you're quite right, because the first night that we were there, they visited me, and there was no doubt about it. And that night, I'm in a love seat, one's facing the other, and I'm right by the windows of the living room. And all of a sudden, my mind just goes crazy, and I'm seeing all sorts of images that are like a roscoe, except that they're overlapping and they're moving, and it's crazy. And then all of a sudden, I see this wolf overlooking a small rabbit in its nest, and it's as though it's about ready to pounce. And I start to stand up, and all of a sudden, this block hits the window, and this 4-foot door out of a 12-foot sliding glass door comes bowing in at me as though it's plastic and fluid. Yeah, see, so I jump back, I'm afraid it's going to consume me, and the door bows back in place and just sits there, and then it comes to rest, and it's as though nothing had ever happened. I take 2 jumps forward, open the door, and look out into the night, and it's about 10 degrees. The only thing I could see or sense is my breath, and sense that my hairs in my nose are freezing. And so I crane my head out the door, and I look all around, and the ambient light tells me there's nothing there. But I know damn good and well something was.
You said you saw a wolf overlooking a rabbit. This is some kind of vision in your mind. This is some kind of premonition. Exactly.
It's like an eidetic image. It's like a lantern slide in between your eye and your mind. And so it was part of this whole collection of images, translucent images that were just pixelating in my mind. At the same time, there's this great bolt of fear that went up from my coccyx or my tailbone up to my head.
And when you said the door, the glass bowed inwards, did this look physically possible? I mean, how would you explain this occurring?
Well, that's a good point. It should have fractured into thousands of little pieces because it was safety glass. But it didn't act like that. But by the same token, I couldn't figure anything else out, except that maybe the neighbor across the way had been window peeping and had their head shield their face up to the glass, and had their hands to the side of their eyes looking in. And as soon as I looked up, then he moved and maybe threw his arm to one side and hit his elbow on the window. So the night that I saw this light, I thought it was him coming back, or somebody coming back. So
I see. It's all connecting now. And then the person you saw on top of the bluff, right, you connected him as well to all this activity. I see.
Yeah, see, so, it was like another layer just went over my head. Other than the fact that this guy was really had a long torso, short legs, and, just looked, not normal. So he didn't have the Greek canons of proportion, let's put it that way. So I work on the shelving all day, and Sarah comes home with the children about 5, and the first thing she says when she comes in the door was, "What do you think of those lights last night?" And so I thought, oh God, here we go again. So I think.
So you think she's just talking about the police car lights?
Yeah, exactly. See, so she was looking due west, and seeing these lights this one light that was up on top of the house, and it rotated around, and it's pretty well described in the book. And then it goes up on top of the bluff, and all of a sudden, it looks like a pixelated version of cloud formations when you see them speeded up, but they're pink and blue lights associated with it, and they go around. And so it's this thing happening up there, and then all of a sudden, bingo, the lights are out and they're gone. So she's seeing that. I'm talking about the patrol car lights, and so there's this total disconnect. But I'm standing outside, and I should have heard anything blast off. So it's like it just disappeared. So when she came home and she told me what she saw, then we started connecting that we had been visited perhaps by a UFO.
It seems as though this was, of course, just the beginning, and throughout the following chapters after this first experience, and I like the way that you've diarized these entries so we have a chronological order of what's occurred. You know, you describe continuing, I guess, harassment of these lights and this strange activity. I wanted to talk about this night when it seems as though you couldn't explain what had happened, where you had worked yourself up into this state of paranoia with these visitations. You were convincing yourself that perhaps you could ambush them with your weapon and put an end to it. And you describe kind of waiting in ambush near the entryway to your house, and you noticed that the door was slightly ajar, and this was unexplainable to you. Can you remember what happened after that, and what memories do you have of that night?
Well, as you depicted, Sarah had seen pink and blue lights on top of the mesa, and going around and around one another. You know, that was the key for me. Well, I had really started waiting for, them to return too long. And so my plan was I just wait up until the pattern emerged, and then I could intercept them and do whatever. I was laying in bed, and so I saw pink and blue lights go by the west window where the sliders are. It turns and comes around the north side, which is near my side of the bed. It goes by, and they're rotating around some sort of central core. I couldn't tell if it was a sphere or if it was a cylinder or what. I grabbed my .38 again and crawled over my wife, ran to an intersecting door, which looked to the door that they were going to come in. At least that's what I thought. So I waited at the corner, waiting for them to come in, and I wasn't going to say freeze or anything. It was just going to be empty the gun. Now I waited about 30 minutes. And so finally I peered around the doorway to look down the hall to where the upstairs entry was, the door. I noticed after a while, my eyes adjusted, and I noticed that the door was open maybe an inch. So that really got me. I couldn't believe it, how they had maybe known that I was going to do what I was going to do. And so I waited a little bit longer, and nothing happened. And I walked up and opened the door without turning on an outside light, and I'm just flooded with the most intense white light I've ever been experienced in my life. And it's almost as though particles went through me. And that was the last thing I remembered that night. I woke up the next morning, I have no marks on me. I'm just as I normally am in the morning. So, there's this really crazy thing that happens to you. You're not sure if it happened or not. You're not sure if you're dreaming. You're not sure of anything, really, except that you had this experience, but there's no evidence.
I find it intriguing, these details as well, and this occurs to you multiple times, where there's no memory of returning to bed that night. You also describe having, I guess, strange dreams and perhaps flashbacks coinciding with these experiences. At one stage, I think you described seeing figures at the foot of your bed, or having a dream of figures at the foot of your bed. Can you remember those details?
We had finals on June the 5th, I think. This is like 1980. And so I had a senior class that was waiting for me, and I was out in the yard, raking the yard, waiting for the sod truck to come so I could put sod out. And I had completely forgotten about my class. Sarah came out and said, Sean, the secretary wants to know what you want to do with your class. And so, then all of a sudden it hits you, oh my God, I'm supposed to be there, and I said, well, hold him, I'll be there in 45 minutes, which was like a lie because it takes an hour. But at any rate, so I thought I could get there in 45. So I rush in and I, throw on some clothes. I jump in the car, which at the time was a 69 Bronco, which had a real light rear end, and which comes into play. So I'm racing to classes, 40 minutes away. I'm zooming down in that direction. The wind's behind me, so I'm really moving. And I put on my brakes and I start sliding because it's bumpy and I'm going too fast. And I slide out into the road, and here's a car coming at me with maybe 60 miles an hour.
Oh no!
And there's just nothing but dust and debris that I brought with myself. And all of a sudden, my whole vision is just taken away from me, and I see 3 gnomes standing at the end of our bed. There's a large one in the middle, which I later measured its size to have been about 4 foot to the top of his hat. Then I came back to reality. I'm sliding into the path of this other car, about to be T-boned, but I put the Bronco in reverse and really, sped away, leaving all sorts of debris from the rubber and the dust and stuff. And so I just had what would be called a subliminal uprush.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a strange thing to enter your mind as you're about to have a collision in the car, to see this vision of gnomes at the foot of the bed. It's so bizarre. But I mean, of course, we're doing this show, we're familiar with the law surrounding UFO abductions, and it seems as though this was maybe something that's overcome a deep hidden memory. It's unlocked something for you.
Except that, I'm a really nuts and bolts person, and I can believe in flying saucers and all of that.
Yeah.
But gnomes, that was not. Those are the little things you put out in the garden.
So that's really what they look like Disneyland fairy tale gnomes.
Yeah, what I saw was.
Okay.
And so I dismissed it as being totally unreal.
Obviously, a skeptic listening to your experiences would put forward the idea that this is like the idea of seeing gnomes. It's a fantasy. It's something produced by your own mind. It's not real, measurable, objective reality. But I guess that leads us back to the other people in your house, the rest of your family, and in particular, your 2 Labradors. Tell us about some of the experiences that seem to shake them, give them intense fear. You described this one night where you found one of your dogs in sheer terror trying to jump over the side of the balcony, and another one, your other dog, just absolutely terrified at a flapping screen door. Tell us what occurred that night.
Now this is where it gets pretty, corny in a way. We had, according to the local historians, we had built our home on the sacred Indian healing ground.
Oh, okay.
Okay, see, so enters, here we have another element that comes into play. One night the dogs were barking, and it was I think it was in late May. And so we had the windows open, or the doors open, but the screens on. And the screens were made out of a mesh that was poly something or other, plastic, typical of its kind. And so I brought the dogs in because they were barking and I didn't want to upset the neighbors, etc. So I brought them in. I made them a little bed out on the porch, the one that I had stood waiting for someone to come around the corner when the lights issue was on. And I woke up sometime later and I heard pots crashing. And so the clay pots were being knocked off the handrail by our female dog, Charma. So I rushed out, and as I rushed up to the screen door, on the inside, it was vibrating back and forth, bang, 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 like something was squeezing its way through the mesh. So if you can imagine that, an invisible thing that has enough density on its perimeter edges to have to not just go through it, but to wiggle its way through.
Oh, that's bizarre.
I know. So anyway, so that's going on right in front of me, and so then it gets through, and there's this heavy thud. Now the thud, you'll find in book 2 is really important. This is thud, and then bingo, it's gone. But it's outside, so it could be anywhere. Well, in the meantime, I open up the slider door with great enthusiasm, and here's Charma, and she is resting her chest on the 10-inch handrail, just ready to push herself on over. And her back...
Charma's your Labrador, yeah?
Yeah, so that's the female. And so her back feet were just pedaling as fast as they could to get a toehold on the inside stucco wall so she could push herself on over, and she was going to jump. And so I grabbed her by the tail and pulled her down and pulled her in, and then stuffed her in the house. And in the meantime, I look over as I'm doing that, and our big male Labrador, who is as brave as they come, he is crouched down in this far corner away from the door, as frightened as, any dog I've ever seen. And so he's in a state of shock. So as soon as I take care of Charma, I grab Huggy Bear. That's what his name is. and I pull him in. And so the area that I pulled him into is the family room. And so they're just wandering around with their tail between their legs, and they won't make eye contact with me.
And how high up was that area that Charma was trying to jump over? What would have happened if the dog got over?
It would have been a story plus almost 4 feet for the enclosure of the balcony. So if she hit her on her head or whatever, she probably would have died. But she would have been really hurt had that happened. So a year later, I hear Charma barking again. And she's barking as though she's looking at something to the east of the house. And then she starts advancing on it, as I can hear her moving towards this little grassy knoll that has a lot of scrub oak on it. So then all of a sudden I hear this yelp, and then thud. The side of the house shakes, and my painting about fell off. I don't know what it is. So I rush outside, and there's Charma laying on the ground. And she was by her bowl, and something was challenging her for the food, evidently. And so she went to chase it away and was thrown up against the house again. So this was...
Was she injured?
Oh, no, she was stunned. I look up, and here's this thing, and it's a translucent brownish color, light brown, translucent thing. And it looks like if a T-Rex, if a T-Rex were to stand so that you could see its profile, it had this big head area, a neck, a thorax, and sticking out from the thorax were these 2 arm-like protrusions. And then the body went on down, and then it acted as though it had hit the ground and had this tail-like behind it. But the thing was about 8 feet tall. It was really big.
How bizarre.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it was. I mean, most of the things that happen, they take you by so surprise that it's your first, you're not frightened. It's like, what the hell is that?
Curiosity, right? Yeah.
Yeah, right. And you're trying to figure out what it is. And so here's this thing looking at me. I'm assuming it's looking at me and measuring my skills. And I'm looking at it and wondering what the hell it was, but in my heart, I knew it was some kind of spirit or some ghost or something, See, so this happens for maybe, I don't know, it seemed like 10 seconds. And then it just starts moving across in front of me diagonally and goes to the front of the yard in the front of the house, in the south side of the front of the house, and disappears through this plum thicket. It never makes any limbs move or anything as it moves. It's right off the ground, but the dry leaves from the scrub oak trees don't make any noise. This thing it's like it was on a zip line and just zip was gone.
Yeah, I remember you describing that. That was fascinating. It's almost gliding above the ground rather than making footsteps. This is just one of the encounters of many that make this story so interesting, because you've got this, I guess, this corny idea, this corny fact that supposedly you've bought this property that's some kind of, significant Indian healing ground. But at the same time, you've got this bizarre UFO activity. You've got strange abduction-like experiences. And what you've just described here, I mean, it's tempting to tie it all in together and say it's some kind of extraterrestrial phenomenon, but from what you're saying, it sounds like this is something maybe unrelated. So does that mean that the property itself is important, that the property itself is attracting or perhaps amplifying this phenomenon?
That's what I believe. We had just moved in, and I had a new colleague at work, and I had a workload that was pretty good. You come home and you're pretty well exhausted, and then I'm worried about the snakes and the children, so I'm laying patio bricks and building this and building that. And so, you don't have really a lot of time to think about it.
It seems as though, yes, the property is important, but you yourself, as we discover, have had a lifetime of these experiences. Let's take a break here, and when we come back, we'll hear from Sean about what he uncovered after speaking to Dr. Leo Sprinkle. You're listening to Mysterious Universe. Stay with us.